Many of us grew up with parents working in unions. Unions built this country through the steel mills, through the shipyards, and the car industry. But why are our cities and states afraid of unions? You're listening to Stay in the Water. I'm your host, Dr. Eric Claville, and we're going to talk about the power of unions and collective bargaining on this show. We'll be right back in just a moment, so stay tuned. Welcome back, and thank you for joining us here on Stay in the Water on this beautiful Sunday that we're experiencing here in Hampton Roads. It's always a great day here in Hampton Roads. And for all of you that are listening across the country, we're hoping that you're enjoying your weekend. And thank you again for tuning in once again to listen to these very important issues where we bring movers, shakers, and policymakers to you to discuss issues that are important to the community. Also, once again, to the Spartan Nation, I'd like to give a big shout out to always our greatest supporters as we here at WNSB Blazing Hot 91 during the 91 days of summer here on the campus of Norfolk State University here in Norfolk, Virginia. Some of the greatest alumni, students, faculty, and supporters in the world. So, we've been going through our Closer Look series here on Stay the Water for the entire month and for the 91 days of summer. And during our Closer Look series, what we've been able to do is take these very important issues that you hear on the news, but we go a little deeper. We delve into it and we pull back the covers on it and we start to ask ourselves, why was this not reported? Why is this not talked about? And how does it affect the community? How does it affect the African-American community? How does it affect your family? How does it affect you economically, you socially, mentally? How do these issues really affect you? So we've talked about, of course, voting rights. We've talked about various laws that have been passed by the Supreme Court. And this week, we're now delving into a topic that, we don't really talk about a lot, but it's very important. And that is the power of unions and collective bargaining. Now, when I mention unions, a lot of times if you're thinking about popular culture, you're thinking about the movies. You're thinking about the underworld and some of the things that go on, in order to get deals done, right? So of course, that's really not what unions are or do. There's a lot of meetings, there's a lot of back and forth, but a lot of the other stuff really doesn't take place. But unions are so important because they help to build our nation. When I talked about the steel industry, when I talked about the auto industry, and here in Hampton Roads, when we talk about the shipyards and the shipbuilding industry, unions and collective bargaining help to build strong families. It helped to improve wages. It helped to improve health benefits, retirement benefits, and working conditions. And they're on the job, thereby helping to improve living standards for our citizens, our families. Now, to help us break this down, we have one of our strongest supporters and fighters in the community. This is a friend of mine, my brother. He's taken some of the hardest hits, but he continues coming back because he believes in these very important issues on the ground, doing the work. None other than Mr. James Boyd, who's the president of the NAACP in the great city of Portsmouth, Virginia. Mr. Boyd, thank you so much for joining us here on Save the Water.
Dr. Claville, thank you so much for having me, and I'm certainly glad to be on to talk with you and your listeners about a very important topic. So definitely honored to be here and definitely looking forward to the conversation.
Absolutely. Now, I want to make sure our listeners understand in context, the power of unions and collective bargaining, but I want to give them a little background about the Commonwealth. Now, I talked about unions and collective bargaining overall in general, right? But in the Commonwealth of Virginia, Virginia was one of the 3 states banning all public sector collective bargaining, along with North Carolina and South Carolina. So we're all connected right here. One of three. And some states prohibit public sector collective bargaining, but make exceptions for police, firefighters, or teachers, and so forth. Now, here in the Commonwealth, and this is where we know where elections have consequences, right? Because when the Democrats took control on May 1st of 2021, a change in Virginia law allowing public sector collective bargaining went into effect. And in anticipation of that, the city of Alexandria adopted an ordinance allowing public sector collective bargaining in the city starting April 17th. This is reported by ballotpedia.org. Now, about this law, Virginia General Assembly approved the legislation in March 2020, repealing Virginia's prohibition of public sector collective bargaining, thereby allowing local governments to bargain collectively with their employees upon adopting and authorizing an ordinance or resolution. Now, you and I both know, because we've been in this fight a long time, that those words mean a lot in legislation.
Right.
So, it's just not repealing the prohibition, but now you got to go a step further. The local government has to now agree to bargain collectively with their employees, meaning public service workers, once they adopt an authorizing ordinance or resolution. So let me tell you what the city of Alexandria did. The city of Alexandria on May 17th, in anticipation of this, and this was last year, they unanimously adopted an ordinance allowing collective bargaining in the city, becoming the first city to do so in light of the upcoming change in law. Now, in like manner, the city of Portsmouth also did the same thing. And this happened here where it seems like looks like they reversed course. So before in 2020, they said, yes, we want to have collective bargaining with our public employees. But just last week, the City Council of Portsmouth actually approved a resolution regarding collective bargaining. Looks like they were reversing course on it, and that vote was 5-2. James, what's going on with the City of Portsmouth and unions and collective bargaining?
Yeah, Dr. Claville, you said a lot of the important points regarding where we are right now as a state, and certainly in the city of Portsmouth, where we are in terms of workers' rights, right? And let me say this from the outset, that any right that we have obtained in this country has always been because people have stood and rallied together, and people have bent the wheels of government to address the disparity and or the injustices that were prevalent in society at the moment. And here we have now, as you mentioned, across the Commonwealth, where workers were not able to collectively come together to advocate for better conditions that they were suffering in jobs. And so now what we have today, because of what the General Assembly passed, basically saying municipalities, you have the ability to recognize your employees in a collective bargaining structure. We have an opportunity for workers across the area, across the state, to now be able to stand up and petition for better working conditions. And so what we had in Portsmouth, as you mentioned in 2020, you had council went on record saying that they agreed, that they generally agreed with allowing their employees to petition for the ability to go into a collective bargaining arrangement and or unions. And what happened was a particular group of employees, the firefighters, came to petition the government to form a union and go into a collective bargaining arrangement. But when it came before council here recently, the last week or so, council decided to change course because the city came before council and told them basically, hey, we don't need we don't need unions. We don't need collective bargaining arrangements with our employees because we have good relationships.
Right.
Well, the challenge is this is not about good relationships. This is about accountability. This is about being able to hold government accountable to a set of standards and conditions that are right for workers. And if it was a case where government would just be able to just improve conditions, well, then it would be a moot point. But we know in this country, as I mentioned, that it takes citizens and accountability structures in order to get to good and just standards. So unfortunately, what you saw was in a resolution on council, wasn't just specifically talking about the firefighters, but generally, council made a statement that said, we don't think unions and or collective bargaining arrangements right now for our employees are needed. And it was the absolute wrong course and a shift in morality, which is wrong for every worker in the city of Portland.
You know, and it seems like within 12 months, because, you know, according to the reporting by the pilot, you know, this was a reverse course. Now, let's take a look at really what unions do, just in general. So,
right.
You know, the power of unions, itself is really to help, and this is from the Economic Policy Institute, right? So, in 1935, the passage of the National Labor Relations Act, what it did, the primary law establishing and encouraging rights in the private sector, has its premise in the lofty goal of encouraging the practice and procedure of collective bargaining between workers and employees. But since 1935, millions of working men and women have won higher pay, better health care and retirement benefits, stronger health and safety protection on the job, and other important improvements through forming unions and using their collective bargaining strength. And historically, it says strong unions have helped ensure that economic growth is distributed broadly and not just in the richest households. So if you go back, and that's from the Economic Policy Institute, if you go back and look at that reporting from the pilot, the firefighters simply wanted to do just that. Since 1935, with the passage of that act, helped to create, to help negotiate with the city as a union, better pay, better
right.
safety measures, better working conditions, and that's it. I mean, who could pass that down? But you know, so the unions seem to be the backbone of strong communities.
That's exactly right, and and even in that case, going down to the specific petition in regards to the firefighters. Let me say at the jump, the fire department in Portsmouth has to deal with a lot of, to be quite frank, institutional racism and disparity that exists within its structure. So we have to talk about that just as prevalent as in the unionship, and they need to have that addressed in regards to their department structure because it's important. But you're right that with not only the firefighters, with other employee groups that may want to come forward, what kind of signal did that send for council to reverse track and to say, hey, right now, collective bargaining, right now, workers' rights are not something that the city is ready for. And I disagree with them totally. We disagree with them totally. The right for every worker to have decent minimum living wage, to have fair and safe working conditions, to be able to stand up and advocate for themselves, that time is always right now. There's not a better time. There's not a wait time for that. That should always be right now. And so that reversal sent a signal across our city, unfortunately, that is not the one that we should have in our city, and it shouldn't be in our region, to be quite honest.
Absolutely. Now, what other, you mentioned other groups. So, of course, firefighters are extremely important. And if you think about it, you know, who doesn't love firefighters? You know,
right.
Fire engines usually come to, you know, when I was growing up and even now, things that we do for our youth at the church and in the community, it's like, oh, bring a fire engine, right?
That's right.
and you know, kids love getting on it. Firefighters are looked upon as being friends of the community and the like. And don't get me wrong, other public service workers and servants do very important jobs. But firefighters, I mean, those are the guys, those are the women that you say, hey, you call when there's something that you need. But not just firefighters, but what other groups within the city could benefit from this they're experiencing these terrible conditions where they need unions to help fight for these high wages, better working conditions, and the like?
That's right, Eric. And one of the, like you said, everybody, I mean, as kids and in the community, you love, when the fire trucks are there. I specifically remember who my bus driver is, right? I remember, like the back of my head, each bus driver that I had, because in any child's life, and parents can attest to this, who their bus driver is plays a critical role in that person's, that child's day. They are the first outreach in terms of the school system to our kids. So one of the groups that have been really vocal about trying to advocate for better conditions is the bus drivers in the city of Portsmouth, right? And although the city council has reversed course, unfortunately, and we're going to be fighting to reverse that, in terms of their stance with collective bargaining, the school board has an opportunity to send the right signal now, because bus drivers in the city of Portsmouth have been dealing for a long time with conditions that have resulted in cultural problems, that have resulted in leadership challenges that have, quite frankly, in some cases led to severe violations that potentially could have impacts on our kids. So one of the things that the bus drivers want to do is to form a structure where they can have accountability and have better conditions within the Department of Transportation. And here's the thing, they have, as I mentioned, they're not just holding others accountable. They want to hold themselves accountable too, in terms of they are not just driving buses, right? They are mentors in our community. They understand that they play a role in our kids' lives. I've heard stories of kids coming on the bus with bags, with grocery bags where they put their books in, and drivers actually will go and get book bags for those kids, or kids that their hair might not be as done as it should be going to school. And so bus drivers would, go and make sure that they are very presentable going to class. But they are an extension of the school system. They are mentors in our community. And so in that case, we have an obligation. Our city, our people have an obligation to those who are taking care of our children to have better conditions. So the bus drivers in our city are organizing, and what a great way for the school board to say, hey, listen, we're gonna correct the course that council did, and we're gonna allow our employees to go into this collective bargaining arrangement and union, and allow them to advocate for better conditions. And by the way, real quick, Eric, the bus drivers have been working on this issue for a long time. This is not a new issue. So one of the reasons why we think a union is important now is because it has been years and years and years, and we haven't gotten any progress. And now with the union, we can get to some progress.
When you mentioned the bus drivers, you said you still remember your bus driver. I started smiling in the studio and then I started reminiscing about riding the school bus in middle school and high school. Mr. Hurd and Miss Gandy, those were our two bus drivers from middle school to high school. And, look, it's been over 30 plus years since I got on that bus, and I still remember them. And I remember at the end of every school year, Miss Gandy would take 25, we would give her 25 cents each for end of the year. She would get us some Faygo drinks. They came in a glass bottle. I think they were like 20 ounces at the time. And they would be iced down. And that was our end of the year. When we got off the bus, we drank our Faygo on the bus, or when we got off, one or the other. And, it's just that little simple thing, right?
Right.
And with bus drivers, it's interesting that you mention them, because once children leave the home, their next face they see is their bus driver. And the bus driver is tasked with the safety and the transportation of our greatest asset, our greatest commodity in our community, to school, of course, to receive the greatest instruction, which is education, the key to open up just about every opportunity of good things we have in our society, education. and then back home, and then after school events and things of that nature. So, the fact that bus drivers don't have unions, the fact that firefighters now can't unionize to have better pay, and there are many others, and hopefully we can go over a couple other groups. But what does that say about local governments? I mean, we see what the city of Alexandria did in Northern Virginia, right?
Yes, I have. Yep, I have. I have.
And that's, they've been able, they say, you know what, we're going to do this. We're not going to even wait till the law comes into effect. We're going to pass a resolution. So the day it comes into effect, we can start, working with our very important public service workers to ensure that they have what they need in order to keep doing the job that they're doing.
That's exactly right, Harry. And even with, with the bus drivers, certainly one of the things that they advocate for is to have better pay, right? And these are specialized employees, right? These are individuals who have CDLs, who have been trained to operate, as you said, our most valuable commodity, our children. And not only transporting them, but as you said, being that mentor, being that person in their lives that they remember. I remember my bus drivers. I remember Miss C. She would always have candy the last day of the school year. We would sing Hip Hop Array, and we would do all the other things. And it would be it brought a different level of spirit within kids that even through their situation, whether they be in a situation that's bad in a home or living in impoverished conditions, you knew that when you got on the bus, that if you had a great bus driver, it could literally help you get through the day, going to school and then going back home. So you're right. I think it's an opportunity for us now to say in our city, hey, listen, even if you're a bus driver, we believe in your rights. We believe that you should not be on a hot bus all day where the temperature is over 100 degrees and you're sitting driving on a bus and you're under an engine and you're sitting there in this condition where you literally can pass out because our city will not invest in all AC buses for our bus drivers, right? And then that goes for our children too because they are on these hot buses, right? There and other things in terms of providing good, sound leadership where bus drivers feel that they have an advocate for them inside of the school system, right? And then having things in place that having opportunities for them to make suggestions that will better and have a better environment for our kids. All these things come with a union. All these things come with collective bargaining arrangements wherein they can advocate and hold the system accountable. It is naive to say that these things would just happen through relationships. That's not you. It has to be level of accountability, which we have seen. You said it perfect, Dr. Claville, about how unions have historically benefited our people. And I mean our people in our communities that have traditionally been disparaged and marginalized. Unions have always helped workers' rights, and that's the case that we can utilize in the city of Portsmouth through the bus drivers with the school board.
And I also want to make clear that there is a union of firefighters in Portsmouth. However, the law is banning collective bargaining or bargaining collectively with the actual city. So people say, oh, my grandfather, my father's part of the union. That is correct. As a matter of fact, according to the article, I believe that Portsmouth Firefighters Union was founded in 1937. Right. So there's a union. Right. But, according to the article itself, the council members expressed a change of heart in collectively allowing them to collectively bargain with their employees. Right. And one reasoning that was given was over cost. And also, they said that the resolution wasn't legally binding. Now, of course, when you start throwing around words like that, get ready for a legal battle, right?
Right.
So we know that may be coming. But the cost, I mean, is it really a major cost not to engage in just talks?
That's exactly right. And here's the thing. When it comes to morality and standing on the right side of history, it costs more for you not to be on the wrong side than it would if you invest now and be on the right side of history and allow your employees the right to be able to advocate for themselves. And even it was mentioned, the figure was mentioned of $2 million. That even if that was the investment, workers have traditionally, for generations, been marginalized. So that in effort to compare moral and social and civil rights to a budget is morally bankrupt. Dr. King talked about it, and it is a bad signal to send across our city. But also, even if you notice in the meeting where Dr. Whitaker tried to make sure that council clarified its position, right? He was ensuring that council clarified, hey, we're not. He wanted to, and in my opinion, listening to his comments, he wanted to clarify to say, hey, this is not us saying that we don't agree with collective bargaining or our ability for our employees to come in the collective bargaining arrangement with the city. But we're talking specifically about what's going on with the fire department. But council still did not use the opportunity to adjust and correct the resolution. So now what we have on the books is this resolution that is sending a bad signal to say, hey, employees, right now is not the time to come to a collective bargaining arrangement with the city, because we have a city manager, a city structure that's going to work, that's going to have a good relationship with you, and we're going to try to work for it eventually. But that means that workers have to wait until when to get better wages. Workers have to wait until when to get better conditions. And that's the different signal that we don't want to send with the bus drivers, right? The school board has an opportunity, and I believe the superintendent, Dr. Bracey, is open to having this type of arrangement, hopefully, where we can, for employees in the school system, we can have a different signal so that their employees can feel that the school board cares about their rights and cares about their conditions.
You know, that really, I believe, is the foundation of just why, you know, we should have unions and why unions are so important. Because, again, it's part of the fabric of the community. You know,
right.
Without unions, without the ability to collectively bargain, or just to have the conversation, right?
Right.
to have the conversation, because, you know, again, even though you say you want X amount increase in wage, you know, the employee doesn't have to agree to it. Now, of course, there is the process of striking and things of that nature, but you at least have to come to the table.
Exactly right.
You know, and it gives a mechanism in order to do that. In our final moments, you know, this is an issue that's not going away. This is an issue that now has, because of the about face and because of what our neighbor to the north has done in Alexandria, just in our final moments, what can the community do in order to move forward and help to support this effort in our final moments here?
Yeah, so one of the things that people can do now is to make our elected officials, whether it be on council or on our school board, raise our voices to say, hey, we want to have a city that believes in workers' rights. We want to have a city that believes in everybody having a good living wage. We want to believe in we want to have a city that employees want to come to work here because they have the ability to advocate for better conditions. And so what we can do as a community, what parents can do throughout the community is make sure that we can raise our voices to support the bus drivers who will be hopefully raising their voices to be in this collective bargaining arrangement, but also collectively, right? We got to hold our elected officials accountable, and this is our moment to do so.
Brother Boyd, is always having you here on Stay in the Water, and also you are definitely a treasure in the community. For those of you who are listening, we'll be back in our second half hour. Well, we'll actually talk with someone who is a public service worker in Portsmouth who's on the ground fighting for this. This is Stay in the Water. I'm your host, Dr. Eric Claville. We'll be back in just a moment. Welcome back, everyone. Thank you for joining us again for Stay in the Water. I'm your host, Dr. Eric Claville. For those of you, again, who are enjoying this phenomenal Sunday here in Hampton Roads and also across the country, to all our listeners who tune in and support us every Sunday at 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Again, thank you for your support. We could not be who we are without you. And also, as we said before, continue to take care of your health, continue to monitor what's going on in your community, and also monitor what's going on around with COVID. We're still getting through this, and we will get through this together. again, for those of you who are joining us for the first time in our second half hour here, during our 91 days of summer here on WNSB Blazing Hot 91, we're talking about the power of unions and collective bargaining in Virginia. In the first half hour, we had a great opportunity to discuss not just the law and the policy, but we also had a chance to talk with one of the leading leaders in the city, in the state and the city of Portsmouth here in Virginia, Mr. James Boyd, who's the president of the NAACP in the area, to really talk about and break down the power of unions and why it's so important for employees of both private and also city employees, public workers, to unionize, the benefits of it. And to delve into it, we have with us a special guest. We have Ms. Sue Moore, who is currently a school bus driver in the city of Portsmouth for Portsmouth Public Schools. Ms. Moore, thank you so much for joining us here on Stay the Water.
Thanks for having me.
So, Ms. Moore, we've been talking about collective bargaining and unions. And we know, as we discussed in the first half hour, the Commonwealth of Virginia is one state of several that had a blanket really ban of unionizing for public workers across the state. You know, it's a right to work state, and, you know, it was highly, highly discouraged. We know that unions help to build America, it helped to build the middle class workforce, and it really helped to build a lot of our middle class and working families. And the Commonwealth of Virginia actually voted, you know, to have cities decide whether their workers and employees can unionize. In the city of Portsmouth in 2020, there was a resolution that was passed that said, hey, we want this to happen for our workers. And then all of a sudden, firefighters said, we want to unionize. And in the city council vote, 5-2, that resolution was voted down, which means it discouraged unions. As a school bus driver, which is a very important position for our children, because you guys take care of our kids. I mean, our kids once they leave our homes, they go to our bus stops, and you're the ones that are transporting them from the homes to the schools and to their after-school activities and back. Tell us why it's so important to you as a school bus driver to have a union.
Well, we've been working for several years now with our administration to voice our concerns of day-to-day activities on the bus. And we're at the point where they're not listening anymore. So I think it's time to form that union so we can get a larger collective voice to make them be more responsible and accountable.
What would a union do for yourself, and what would it do for you and your coworkers as it relates to the working conditions currently?
Like I said, give us a stronger voice. We can bring our issues to them on a higher level.
Absolutely.
We've had a lot of issues going on. For example, our poor leadership. It's been going on for years now. They are having us do things that occur in our workplace that lead to policy and law violations. We've had Virginia Department of Education violations that could put us at risk for losing our commercial driver's license. We experience extreme heat conditions as well as issues with our pay. Discrepancy between drivers of the same years getting different pay levels. Same with our monitors.
Wow. And all of these issues have been raised currently, but you're saying there's been no movement on resolving them or even coming to a discussion or an agreement about how they can be improved?
Not at this point. They say they're going to work on it, and it's like radio silence. We don't hear anything else back from them.
Wow. Now, how many years have you been working as the school bus driver for the school board?
I'm coming up on my 19th year in September.
Oh, wow. Congratulations.
Thank you.
That is absolutely wonderful. And listen, I talk about, I mentioned earlier, our school bus drivers, you're so important to the growth of our children, because you provide the safety of transportation back and forth. And when you said 19 years, a smile came across my face, because I remember my school bus drivers, both in middle school and also high school. I mean, it's so good to see that someone like yourself has been there, where you've probably transported and taken care of brothers and sisters all the way from elementary all the way up to high school.
That is correct. And now I'm working on second generation. I carried my daughters to school. Now I'm carrying my granddaughter to school.
Wow, that is absolutely wonderful. Now I know that that you said that the school board and your profession have been trying to reach some type of resolve on these very important issues. And really, they're safety issues. So if there's safety issues for you as a driver, there's safety issues for us as parents and grandparents of our children. So what can we do, or the citizens do, in order to help to aid your cause in order to improve these unsafe conditions?
The parents can help by making the community aware of these conditions, by coming out and supporting us when we are voicing our concerns for their children and speaking up on their concerns at the school board meetings. Most of the time we're out there, a handful of us talking, and we have no one to stand behind us and say, yes, it is a concern for them also.
Wow. So, as you said, coming to the meetings, standing by you as their protector, standing by you as their transporter of their children, voicing just care, voicing support will help to move the needle. Lastly, Ms. Moore, if you could, in the last few moments that we have here, and again, I want to thank you so much for joining us, to tell us about your experience. For 19 years, you've done this job, you've done it at a high rate of excellence, and obviously you love it because you've been there 19 years. If these conditions are not improved, what do you believe would be the state of keeping school bus drivers like yourself and bringing on others in Portsmouth?
Well, I'm already seeing it. I'm seeing fellow drivers that had been working before I started driving that became friends, that they're fed up with it. They're leaving. They're either finding positions in other cities or changing careers after 20-some years to something different, because their heart is no longer in it, because they've been denied being heard for so long. They're over it. And I've voiced that to administration. You're losing very valuable, experienced, loyal bus drivers because you don't show any compassion to us, that you don't want to hear what our issues are and you don't want to do anything to help us.
After the vote of the city council, what is the next move? What is the next thing that we as a community, as the parents of the children that you carry, what is the next opportunity for this canvassing, or maybe this opportunity to rally around this issue?
That is a good question. For myself, I'm not quite sure where we go from here. That's why a union, talking union, getting it started would help advise us the right directions to start moving, and organizing the parents, because, like you said, we are carrying the most precious, commodity of the city.
Absolutely. And Ms. Moore, I want to thank you again for your service to our most precious assets and commodities in our community, our children. Congratulations on 19 years in the profession. And again, we wish you the best in your efforts to try to break the glass ceiling and get the first union for school bus drivers in this city.
Thank you. I appreciate your time.
Thank you. So again, powerful stories of real people who are experiencing and going through on the ground what it takes to create a union, what it takes really to create change. I mean, let's just take the word union out of it. It's definitely what it takes to create change. I mean, we saw it in summer 2020. Of course, through our history, we've seen it, in every decade, of course, the 50s, the 60s, and the like, and of course, the Black Power movement, things of that nature. But what you have to do to create change, nobody's going to give it to you, and we're talking about just really common sense legislation, common sense policies, common sense rules and regulations that help people to live better lives, to help people to do their jobs better, to help people who want to live the American dream and stay in the local communities. Now, we always say that all politics is local, right? But this actual issue proves it, that all politics is local. Because you get no more local than your local school board. You get no more local than your local public service workers, because they're the ones that keep things running. They're the ones that keep society moving in your own community. They're the ones that actually are on the ground ensuring that everything goes. Now, Ms. Moore mentioned something. She made a statement, and really, Marvin, he called it the drop the mic moment. I mean, that was drop the mic. Some individuals care more about our trash, what we throw away, than our greatest commodity. So through their policies, now they're not saying that through their words, but through their actions, through their policies of to pay or not to pay. So, it's a local issue. The local governments, the local politicians, the local public service workers, the local community, the local people, the local businesses have to make that decision for that community. But I want us to talk about and to take a look at what unions did really to build our country. One thing that unions did, and I'm going to use this example of the car industry. The car industry, now, the largest union, the AFL-CIO, and the president of it, as I mentioned earlier in the show, passed away. And he was a major fighter for local workers in industries and so forth. And when you think about unions, you think about welders, you think about pipe fitters, you think about laborers. You think about all these workers that are doing these very dangerous jobs, in order to get our country and our communities and our society moving and keep it moving. But what unions did, unions gave the common, or what they call the average Joe, the common man, the opportunity to work together as a group and lobby for conditions, rights, pay, proper procedures to help them. I mean, how phenomenal is that? When I think about unions, Marvin, I think about the car industry. I think about the hard hats. I think about car industries like Ford and GM and all these companies that help to build the Midwest and put everybody in the car, that great era. I think about, the steel workers, those industries that help to fund the building of our military. And we know here, now I'm going to get to here because we have one of the largest shipbuilding yards here in our area. We have the largest naval base in the world here in our backyard. I mean, think about that. The largest naval base in the world is located here in our backyard. That is phenomenal. Absolutely phenomenal. And how many people were raised with someone working, in the shipyard, raised with someone working for the Department of Defense or DOD or some entity that's connected to that? How many of us have grandfathers and grandmothers and fathers and mothers and or us currently or our siblings that are connected to that industry. How great is that? That because those unions, those industries help to put food on the table, roofs over the head, but not just food on the table, roofs to the head, but quality diets, quality homes in areas that are not polluted, areas that have good, what we call good school districts or school districts that are good for our children. I'll say that. It also helped to put those children through college, to get in college education where their family members probably did not. I know that I grew up, I have professionals in my family, judges and cousin, first African-American valedictorian of a major PWI and the history of it and Harvard graduates. But in my immediate family, I was the first person to graduate, from college. And my parents were public servants, and the collective bargaining, the power of that collective bargaining, the power of those unions helped to create those wages and those opportunities to rise up, to rise through the ranks. So when I think about unions, of course, some people think about, the popular movies and, that you may see, of course, some that, in order to sell a movie, it's got to have action in it, right? It's got to have suspense. So you think about those movies that have action and suspense and the underworld and all that. But really what unions did and do for our country, it gives a community, it gives a sense of belonging, and it gives power, again, to the common person to really say that I have a stake now. I'm one vote, but I'm one vote in a collective group of many that form together and say that we can't have this or we want this. And we know that we actually have a chance. We actually have a chance of actually securing this very, very important work that we have for us. And then these working conditions to make them safer. Unions, we're too young to remember this, but remember, child labor was a thing, during the time of the Industrial Revolution in factories. Children used to work in factories, but children working in factories is not safe. And one thing that we were able to do, we were able to outlaw that, first of all, which is good policy, and set some standards for how individuals could work in factories and so forth. But the other thing that also helped is that we also helped to raise the wages. We're talking about living wage. Oh yeah, a real living wage to live decent, to live good, and to live in a way that we can achieve the American dream. But there's also another important aspect of unions. Now, we talked about the power of unions. We talked about the history of it. We talked here in the Commonwealth. And we talked about why, in part, unions are not looked upon as being favorable for companies. But unions have now this power of what's called collective bargaining. And a lot of what I've just talked about, is collective bargaining, right? So that's what comes out of collective bargaining. But but what the power of collective bargaining is that now, as a group, you can, if a company says we want to pay you $5 an hour extra for this, you say no. We're working these extra hours. This is our regular pay. This is the danger of this particular job. We don't want 5. This is worth 15. And then, of course, you go back and forth, and you'll come to a compromise. You either get to 15, or you don't, or they don't fold, and you go on a strike, and then sooner or later, you'll come to a realization of, look, this is what I need, right? So you come to a realization and you meet in the middle or get some other concessions and the like. That's the power of negotiation, right? But, with that, we also have in the private job sector, not just in the public, but also the private. And I want to introduce this concept. It's called the National Labor Relations Act, NLRA. It's a primary law establishing organizing rights in the private sector. And it has its premise It's a lofty of goals of encouraging the practice and procedure of collective bargaining between workers and their employees. You know, since the passage of this act, and I'm looking at, this is from the Economic Policy Institute. It says, since the passing of this act in 1935, millions of working men and women have won higher pay, better health care and retirement benefits, stronger health and safety protection on the jobs, and other important improvements through forming unions and using collective strength in bargaining with their employers. Also, it says that historically strong unions have helped to ensure that economic income growth is distributed broadly and not just to the richest households. I'll say that again. Historically, strong unions have helped to ensure that income is distributed broadly and not just to the richest households. That's key. That is key. Because if the richest households have all the money, if the richest households have all of the wealth of the country, and everyone else is pretty much fighting for pennies, you know, that makes for a very bad situation. That makes for a dire situation. That means that your living standard dips tremendously, where really you don't have a living standard. That means that now if you get hurt and sick, well, guess what? You don't have a job anymore. Guess what? If you don't have a job, you may not be able to eat tonight. If you don't have a job, you don't have your home, a roof over your head. So trust me, we've seen a lot of this in 2020, 2021. We're seeing it. We're going to talk about the eviction moratorium, and we're going to talk about the effects of the COVID on the economy as these provisions are peeled away. These protections are peeled away. You know what we're going to see later on. What is that going to reveal? So right now you've got hands pushing back on this tsunami wave of things that COVID created or COVID actually exacerbated or revealed what was already happening. So we're going to see what's going to happen. We're going to talk about that more on another State of the Water, a closer look. So definitely stay tuned. But we're getting back to this, the power of strong unions. Again, looking at the Economic Policy Institute, strong unions historically have helped ensure that economic growth is distributed broadly and not just to the richest households. But also, I want to go back to the first part. We talk about 1935. 1935, that era, that was after the Great Depression. And what happened in that time period, a lot of individuals needed protections. They needed protection. And this act that we see, the NLRA, the National Labor Relations Act, it helped to foster, this type of collective bargaining between workers and employers, because before it wasn't. With that, we get stronger pay for both men and women, higher pay. We talked about women getting paid less, African-American women getting paid much less than their white male counterparts. Of course, Hispanic women less, Native American women less, and also white women less. But even there's disparity within all of all women based upon not just race and ethnicity, but also age, right? But this helped to create higher pay, better health care, and retirement benefits. I mean, think about it. You used to work on a job, 20 years? Maybe 25 or 30 if you really want to do it, and get all your benefits, And then now you have security. And that's what it did. It gave us security in our community, in our household, and stronger health and safety protection on the job. I mean, think about it. When COVID hit, we received a lot of employers, including here at the university, provided PPE gear, masks and hand sanitizer and gloves, enough to say, hey, this is to help protect you. This is to get you started. A lot of employers, they provide it on a daily basis. So with that, what if we didn't have that opportunity? What if collective bargaining said, no, you bring all your own stuff in? And if you don't have it, because there were a lot of resources that were stretched. But if collective bargaining was the power that was given to unions to create what we have today, then what does it say about the about face of local communities that say, no, we don't favor unions. We don't favor collective bargaining. We don't favor public service workers having these rights, having this opportunity. What does it say for higher wages or living wages for our working citizens? What does it say for higher living wages for women who are becoming, in some sectors, in some groups, and in some communities, the only breadwinner? Forget the highest breadwinner, but the only breadwinner. Because look, if you have somebody who doesn't make the high wage and they're trying to care for 2 kids, maybe 3, and now you're saying you're going to depress their wages, or they don't have the ability to lobby for collectively bargain for higher wages, what does that do now for the quality of upbringing for those children? What does it do for the quality of the food that they eat, the quality of the home that they have, the quality of extracurricular activities that they do? And now we have a cyclical effect. Well, now if they can't find the quality in their homes, then possibly what ends up happening is that idle hands, idle minds, you start to get into mischief. And then it becomes a public safety issue, and then the ball just continues to roll and roll and roll. Now, of course, I started with a large snowball and it went downhill, but you get the point. So, again, it is the power of unions and collective bargaining that help to build our country, that help to build our strong communities, that help to build the middle class. And we continue to need that. We continue to need that in our communities. Well, once again, I mean, we have a great discussion, a great time, but we have run out of time. We want to thank all of you again for joining us here on State of the Water and taking this time out of your Sunday, every Sunday at 1 o'clock. But if you missed any of it, you can go to our social media at WNSBonline.org and hear it. Again, I'm Dr. Claville, your host, and we'll see you on next week. God bless.